Agatha Raisin and the Bride of Odley Cruesis. A wedding in the Cotswolds should have promised lace, lilacs, and polite gossip, not a bride collapsing at the altar with secrets still clinging to her bouquet. Settle in for intrigue, scandal, and Agatha Raisin at her meddling best. Now tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. The rain came to Castley like a shy visitor, soft, polite, and certain to stay too long. It turned the honey-stone cottages a mellow gold and made the lanes smell of damp earth and gossip. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen window with a cigarette and the Morning Post, feeling that particular mixture of boredom and hope known only to the middle-aged and restless. Hodge, her large tabby cat, regarded the drizzle with contempt from the windowsill. Agatha envied him. Cats never fretted about social calendars. She slit open the pile of envelopes with a butter knife. Bills, circulars, and then something heavier, creamy parchment, embossed with a coat of arms that reeked of money and mildew. "Lucinda Creswell requests the pleasure," she read aloud, voice tightening. "A wedding invitation. Odley Cruesis Hall." The name alone dripped privilege. Agatha frowned. She had met Lucinda only once, years ago, at some ghastly charity garden party where the woman had worn pearls the size of peas and spoken as if she'd invented condescension. "Well, well," said Agatha, lighting another cigarette. "Someone's marrying above her station, or below mine." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. The telephone shrilled. She snatched it up. "Darling," came the effervescent voice of Roy Silver from London. "Tell me you've seen it. The wedding of the century. Lucinda Creswell and that mysterious novelist. They say he writes thrillers under a false name." "They also say gin cures arthritis," said Agatha. "Why on earth would I go?" "Because, sweetie, you live for this sort of thing. A gloomy manor, rich people, potential scandal. It's practically your spiritual home." Agatha hesitated. The past months had been thin on excitement. No murders, no romance, just drizzle and Doritos. A society wedding might at least remind people she existed. "All right," she said, trying for indifference. "But if it's one of those modern affairs with vegan canapes, I'm leaving." "Count me in," Roy trilled. "I'll book us rooms at the inn. Imagine the hats." He rang off before she could change her mind. Agatha stared again at the invitation. Beneath the calligraphy was a faint scent, lavender, and something metallic. The kind of smell one associated with old jewellery and older grudges. She set it aside, poured a small gin, and told herself she was going out of curiosity. Not envy, never envy. By the next afternoon, Castley had digested the news. Doris Simpson turned up to clean and immediately began. "That Creswell girl, miss. Didn't her family own half of Odley once? All gone to rack and ruin, they say. Terrible damp." "So am I, Doris," said Agatha dryly. "That's why I'm taking gin as protection." Mrs. Bloxby arrived soon after, serene in her raincoat, carrying scones. "I hear you've been invited to a wedding," she said gently. "Word travels fast in this village," said Agatha. "It gallops," replied Mrs. Bloxby, smiling. "I remember Odley Cruesis. My husband once gave a sermon there. It's a beautiful place, though rather haunted by its past." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Haunted by bad plumbing, more likely." "Still," Mrs. Bloxby continued, "some old houses keep their sorrows." Agatha, who had her own collection of sorrows, did not care to pursue that line. She packed instead, tailored suit, heels impractical for gravel, emergency gin, and a hat she privately believed would make even the bride jealous. 2 days later, the village of Odley Cruesis revealed itself through sheets of rain. The hall stood on a rise above the church, its stone dark with age, ivy clutching like possessive fingers. As the taxi rolled to a stop, Agatha's first impression was of grandeur slightly past its sell-by date, a debutante who had drunk too much and forgotten to powder her nose. Roy bounced beside her, all cologne and enthusiasm. "Isn't it marvellous? Think of the photo opportunities. We'll look mysterious against the gargoyles." "You look mysterious enough," said Agatha. Inside, the air smelled of wax polish and secrets. Portraits of unsmiling ancestors lined the hall. A liveried maid ushered them to their rooms and whispered that the rehearsal would begin shortly. Agatha caught sight of the bride sweeping down the staircase, tall, fair, composed, her gown for the rehearsal simple but elegant. Lucinda Creswell looked exactly the sort of woman Agatha most disliked, serene, graceful, and apparently immune to middle age. The groom, a dark-haired man with writerly gloom, hovered beside her. His name, whispered about, was Simon Larch, pen name S.L. Dark, author of brooding thrillers beloved by women who knitted doom. Agatha made a mental note to dislike him too. The rehearsal unfolded in the chapel adjoining the hall. Candles smoked, flowers wilted early under the damp. Roy whispered colour commentary throughout. "That best man's rather pretty," he murmured. "Too pretty. Never trust a man whose hair moves as a single unit." Agatha smothered a laugh, earning a glare from the vicar. During a lull, she wandered towards the front pews, pretending interest in the altar arrangements. She noticed something odd. The bride's bouquet, white lilies, heavily perfumed, was already shedding pollen, though freshly arranged. Near it lay a small silver hairpin glinting on the floor. Agatha pocketed it with the innocence of a magpie. "Agatha," hissed Roy, "come back before you get excommunicated." They resumed their seats. Lucinda and Simon rehearsed their vows, voices echoing off stone. The atmosphere thickened, not from romance but from unspoken tension. Agatha sensed it the way she sensed a poorly kept secret, instinctively, hungrily. The groom avoided the gaze of a woman standing at the rear, a striking brunette with stormy eyes and a dress a shade too glamorous for a rehearsal. She looked familiar, though Agatha couldn't place her. As the vicar closed his book, the woman strode forward. "You can't marry her," she said, voice slicing the murmurs. "He's mine. He'll never be yours." Gasps rippled through the pews. Lucinda stiffened but did not reply. The groom turned pale as chalk. For one delicious, dreadful moment, all was silent except for the rain hammering the stained glass. Then Roy breathed, "Darling, this is better than television." The woman was led out by the bewildered verger, and the rehearsal collapsed in confusion. Agatha's heart thudded with exhilaration disguised as outrage. Nothing cheered her more than someone else's public humiliation. Lucinda regained her composure quickly, too quickly, thought Agatha. She murmured apologies, declared the matter past history, and swept away like a queen forgiving peasants. The groom followed, dazed. "Did you see that?" Agatha whispered. "That wasn't embarrassment, that was fear." "Fear, darling, or indigestion," said Roy. "The canapes look lethal." They retreated to the inn through the drizzle, where the landlord's dog barked as if sharing gossip. Over supper, Roy dramatized every moment while Agatha stared into her wine, replaying the scene. The woman's words echoed like a prophecy. "He'll never be yours." Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, already half in detective mode, though she would have denied it furiously. After all, she reminded herself, this was only a wedding. Still, some vows were made to be broken. The following morning dawned grey and prim, as if the Cotswolds disapproved of weddings altogether. Agatha Raisin peered from the inn window at the dripping hedgerows, the kind of view that could drive even a nun to gin. Roy Silver was still snoring, face smothered by an eye mask he claimed had belonged to Elton John. She tugged her cardigan tighter, cigarette in hand, and watched Odley Cruesis Hall across the misted fields. It looked even more sinister in daylight, a mansion wearing its own secrets like fine lace over rot. By the time she arrived at the hall, it was bedlam disguised as preparation. Bridesmaids fluttered like startled pigeons. Florists bickered about vases. Someone had misplaced a tiara, and the housekeeper was threatening to resign for the fourth time that morning. Lucinda Creswell, the bride-to-be, floated through the chaos with maddening composure. Not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle of human worry. Agatha, who had never managed serenity for longer than 10 seconds, felt an irrational desire to drop something sticky on her immaculate cream dress. "You're a vision, dear," said Agatha sweetly. Lucinda smiled, perfectly, mechanically. "Thank you, Mrs. Raisin. Simon says everything must be perfect." "Does he now?" said Agatha, who distrusted any man giving orders about wedding aesthetics. Roy, meanwhile, was in his element, fluttering around like a decorative moth. "Oh, it's divine. The flowers, the lace, the heartbreak waiting to happen." Agatha rolled her eyes. "You'll frighten the servants into a strike." They were interrupted by a familiar drawl. "Agatha, my dear, you look marvellous. Positively bridal yourself." She turned to see Charles Fraith leaning against the doorway, hands in pockets, expression of amused indolence. "Charles," she exclaimed, "what are you doing here?" "Thought I'd lend class to the proceedings," he said. "Besides, one hears of these weddings, people dying of boredom. I thought I'd offer moral support." "Moral or immoral?" "Whichever improves the wine list." Agatha felt both annoyed and secretly relieved. Charles had the unnerving ability to turn any situation into something half amusing, half exasperating. At dinner that evening, the long table groaned under crystal and candlelight. The guests, a mixture of fading aristocrats and desperate writers, made conversation as brittle as the glassware. Agatha, squeezed between Roy and the best man, endured a speech on the decline of literature. The best man, handsome, with that slippery confidence peculiar to men who think they're irresistible, leaned towards her. "You're not local, are you?" "Sharp as a tack," said Agatha. "No, I'm not. Carcely. Investigative type." "Journalist?" "Sort of. I ask questions. People answer or wish they hadn't." He laughed, teeth too perfect. "I do like a woman with bite." "Be careful," said Agatha. "I've had my jabs." He touched her hand lightly, too lightly to be innocent. She tolerated it long enough to finish her wine, then noticed something odd, a small envelope on the table beside him, half concealed beneath his napkin. When he rose to fetch more champagne, she caught the quick movement of his fingers slipping it into his jacket pocket. Agatha's instincts flared like a match. "Lose something?" she asked sweetly as he sat back down. "Not at all." "Funny," she said. "The bride seemed to have misplaced a letter earlier. Blue paper, ribbon seal. You haven't seen it?" He smiled blandly. "No idea what you mean." Agatha smiled back, equally false. She had caught a glimpse of the bride's monogram on the envelope's corner before it disappeared. Roy whispered theatrically, "Darling, don't interrogate the help. It ruins digestion." Agatha ignored him. Her curiosity, once stirred, was as stubborn as Hodge on a wet morning. Later, in the drawing room, she overheard fragments of gossip, servants muttering about a missing sapphire hairpin, supposedly part of the bridal trousseau. Another claimed the registrar had complained that a page from the wedding register was torn out. "Probably Lucinda practicing her signature," someone said. Agatha, listening by the sideboard, thought it rather too much coincidence. Missing jewels, missing paper, and a best man with sticky fingers. Her thoughts were interrupted by Bill Wong's voice on the inn's landline that evening. "Agatha, tell me you're not interfering," he said, half laughing, half weary. "Interfering? Me? I'm merely attending a social function." "I know you. You hear gossip and turn into Scotland Yard. Keep out of it for once." "You're the police, Bill," she retorted. "If there's a thief in the bridal suite, consider this public service." "Promise me you won't make a scene." "I never make scenes," she said. "You are a scene," said Bill, and hung up. Agatha glared at the receiver, muttering, "Ungrateful lot, the constabulary." She poured herself a gin, told herself to relax, and failed completely. Night settled over Odley Cruesis hall. The inn was quiet except for the creaks of old timber and Roy humming in the next room while applying face cream that smelled of violets and regret. Agatha couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the dinner, the smug best man, the missing letter, Lucinda's strange calm. There was something almost rehearsed about her every smile, as if she were acting a part she'd memorized too well. She rose, pulled on her dressing gown, and stepped to the window. The hall loomed across the meadow, a few lights burning behind thick curtains. She imagined the bride brushing her golden hair, rehearsing her perfect lines. Somewhere, Agatha thought, there was a crack in that perfection, and she meant to find it. She was about to return to bed when a sound sliced through the stillness, a scream, sharp and high, echoing from the direction of the hall. Roy burst in, hairnet askew. What was that? "Someone enjoying the romance of the Cotswolds," said Agatha, grabbing her torch. They hurried downstairs, the innkeeper already at the door in his dressing gown. "Heard it too," he muttered. "Sounded like trouble up at the hall." "We should go," said Agatha, thrilling at the thought. "We should not," said Roy, clutching his robe. "People who go towards screams usually end up regretting it." Before they could decide, a figure appeared at the lane's end. One of the hall servants, pale and shaking. "It's nothing," she called, voice trembling. "Just the pipes again. Old house noises." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Pipes that scream?" "Aye, they do that sometimes. Wind in the flues," the girl said quickly, then turned and fled back towards the hall. Roy exhaled. "There you are. Pipes. Mystery solved. Back to bed. But Agatha stood motionless, heart thudding with a mix of curiosity and foreboding. She'd lived long enough to know the difference between plumbing and panic. "Roy," she said slowly, "I think the bride's perfection just cracked." He groaned. "Oh, Agatha, must everything be murder with you?" "Not everything," she said, watching the distant light flicker out, "just the interesting bits." The morning of the wedding dawned so dazzlingly bright that even the Cotswolds looked scrubbed for the occasion. Mist lifted from the meadows like a curtain, revealing Odley Cruesis Hall bathed in reluctant sunshine. Agatha Raisin, standing by her inn window in a silk scarf and scowl, told herself it was all too perfect. Perfect mornings were like perfect marriages, doomed to cloud over. Roy Silver burst in, dressed in lavender linen that fought violently with the wallpaper. "Darling, it's the big day. Let's make the locals feel underdressed." "That won't take much," said Agatha. She stubbed out her cigarette, checked her reflection, and decided she looked respectable enough to cause comment. The hall's drive glittered with hired cars. Guests rustled in silk and expectation. Agatha and Roy joined the polite swarm filing toward the chapel. Inside, the scent of lilies fought with damp stone and overused perfume. Lucinda Creswell glided past in a froth of white lace and icy self-possession. She was the sort of bride who made other women inspect their hair and feel vaguely unwashed. Agatha, whose hat kept slipping, muttered, "Too perfect by half." Charles Fraith appeared beside her, immaculately late. "You disapprove, my dear." "I mistrust anyone who looks that serene. Even Hodge twitches before pouncing." "Perhaps she's merely happy." "Don't be absurd," said Agatha. "No one's that happy without pills." The music began, a string quartet attempting Bach and nearly succeeding. The congregation shifted with the rustle of money and gossip. The bridesmaids, pale and nervous, lined up like decorative hostages. Then the ceremony started. The vicar's voice floated through the hush, smooth as custard. Simon Larch, the groom, looked suitably adoring, though his eyes had that faintly haunted look men acquire when they realize it's too late to run. Agatha observed everything. The missing sapphire hairpin mentioned the night before had not reappeared. The bridesmaids whispered over it like conspirators, and the matron of honour, a sharp-nosed woman named Delia, seemed more interested in rearranging place cards than in the ceremony. Roy leaned over and whispered, "Darling, this is divine. She's radiant, like a Vogue cover, before disaster." Agatha hushed him, though she agreed. Lucinda's face had that porcelain stillness that invites admiration and a faint chill. "Do you, Lucinda Creswell, take this man?" Lucinda opened her mouth, but the words caught. She swayed. For a second, Agatha thought it theatrical nerves. Then the bouquet slipped from her hands. She staggered once, twice, and fell. Gasps rippled. Someone screamed. The organ hit a wrong note that went on forever. Agatha was already pushing forward. Years of meddling had given her excellent reflexes. She knelt beside the bride, who lay twisted amid crushed lilies and scattered ribbon. The air reeked suddenly of almonds. "Give her air," someone cried. "She doesn't need air," Agatha said grimly. "She needs a doctor, or possibly a priest." The groom sank to his knees, face drained. "Lucinda! My God!" Then he slumped sideways in a faint so theatrical Agatha almost applauded. Roy covered his mouth. "Darling, this is ghastly. And yet, what a finale." "Quiet," snapped Agatha. "Fetch the vicar, and don't touch the bouquet." She leaned closer. On the stem she saw a faint white residue, powder clinging to the ribbon. Something cold slid down her spine. Within minutes, chaos engulfed the hall. Guests milled about, weeping and speculating with equal enthusiasm. A bridesmaid sobbed into her gloves. Delia declared hysterically that someone had moved her seating plan, as if that were the true tragedy. Bill Wong arrived with weary efficiency, having been summoned by the vicar's wife. "Agatha," he said when he spotted her, "tell me you're not interfering again." "Just observing," she said, "and observing that bouquet might be worth your attention." The coroner, a small man with unfortunate spectacles, knelt by the body. He sniffed delicately. "Smells like cyanide. Could be from floral preservative in the water." "Cyanide?" said Agatha. "Not the usual ingredient for happily ever after." "Best not speculate," murmured Bill, already scribbling. Roy fluttered up, pale but thrilled. "Bill, love, the groom fainted. Don't you think that's suspiciously convenient?" "Or human," said Bill. "Nonsense," Agatha declared. "He looked faint long before she did, and I heard that awful woman, the bridesmaid, quarrelling about the seating earlier. Jealousy, Bill. It curdles faster than milk." "Everyone was quarrelling," said Bill patiently. "Try to let me do my job this once." Agatha glared but subsided, slightly. She noticed a torn scrap of paper near the altar, a corner of parchment, edges ragged. She slipped it neatly into her handbag while the crowd fussed. Years of experience had taught her the police never appreciated helpful civilians until after the fact. Outside, guests stood in stunned clusters. The photographer had abandoned his camera. The doves meant for release cooed irritably in their wicker cage. Charles appeared, hands in pockets. "You look remarkably cheerful for a woman at a funeral," he said. "I'm not cheerful," said Agatha. "I'm curious. There's a difference. Curiosity keeps one young." "And trouble keeps you entertained," said Charles. "What did you find?" "Powder on the bouquet, a missing hairpin, and a groom with weak nerves." "Any of those fatal?" "One of them will be," she said. Bill emerged, clipboard in hand. "We'll have to seal the hall. The guests can return to their lodgings. I'll need statements from everyone. Tomorrow, preferably when tempers cool." "Tomorrow?" cried Roy. "But we're still dressed for nuptials." "Wear black," suggested Agatha. They were shepherded away, murmuring condolences and scandal. Agatha lagged behind, glancing once more at the chapel. Lucinda's veil lay abandoned on the stone floor, like an accusation. Back at the inn, Roy collapsed into a chair. "Darling, I'm emotionally drained. Weddings are dangerous." "You only say that because no one ever proposed to you," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. "Plenty have. I just have standards." She ignored him, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. The day's brightness had vanished behind thickening clouds. Somewhere, thunder muttered, a theatrical encore. Charles sauntered in without knocking as usual. "Bill's keeping the press at bay, but word will spread. Poisoned bride, it's practically literature." "Don't romanticize murder," said Agatha. "You would," he said mildly, "if it gave you something to do again." She bristled, then sighed. "Perhaps. It's been a dull season." "Not any more." Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, reached for her gin, and met his amused gaze. "It wasn't love that killed her," she said quietly. "It was pride." "Yours or hers?" She hesitated, just long enough for the question to sting, and poured another gin. Morning crept over Odley Cruesis like a ghost reluctant to be seen. Mist curled along the hedgerows, softening gravestones and guilt alike. The hall stood silent under police tape, its windows blind and unrepentant. Agatha Raisin watched from the gate, cigarette burning low between her fingers, feeling that familiar, prickling excitement she always mistook for professional curiosity. Roy Silver shivered beside her in a violently patterned jumper. "Darling, it's like Rebecca meets Crime Watch. Do you think they'll let me film a reconstruction?" "You'd have to die first," said Agatha. Tempting thought. The constable on duty informed them briskly that Odley Cruesis Hall was sealed for forensic examination. Agatha made a great show of sighing, as if the nation's justice system existed purely to inconvenience her. "Fine," she said. "We'll find somewhere else to stay. Somewhere with character." Roy looked wary. "You mean somewhere cheap?" They found character in abundance at the Mourner's Rest, a gloomy Victorian B&B crouched beside the churchyard. Mrs. Trent, the proprietress, was a tall, gaunt woman with a voice like the wind through keyholes. She wore black lace at breakfast and had the air of someone who had buried everyone she'd ever liked. "You'll find it peaceful here," she said, placing a single egg each before them. "Our last guest said he heard whispers in the walls." Roy blanched. Oh, how utterly provincial. "He was a medium," added Mrs. Trent. "He left in a hurry." Agatha perked up. "Did he pay first?" "Not entirely." Agatha liked her immediately. The room was narrow and wallpapered in brown florals that might once have been cheerful. Roy examined the plumbing with visible despair. "Shared bathrooms, darling. No minibar, no gin. How will civilization survive?" "It'll be leaner for the loss," said Agatha. She unpacked her cigarettes and notebook, her essentials for fieldwork. Roy flopped onto the bed. "I'm traumatized already. Shall we at least find some gossip?" Agatha, Never one to waste a lead, began with the vicarage. The Reverend Tewkesbury's wife, a nervous woman with the look of a hunted vole, greeted them over a half-baked sponge. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin," she said, wringing her hands, "this whole business is dreadful. The poor bride, and the papers, well, you know what they're like." "I certainly do," said Agatha, with the tone of someone who had frequently supplied their material. Mrs. Tewkesbury leaned closer, whispering like someone confessing theft. "It's not the first tragedy, you know. That family's had bad luck for generations. Lucinda's father drank, gambled, lost the estate, and when he died, he left a trail of angry creditors. People round here say the Creswells never pay their debts. Not in life, not in death." Agatha's interest sharpened. "Enemies, then. Useful things to have." "Not for long," said the vicar's wife, crossing herself. "They tend to die suddenly." Outside, drizzle had begun again, fine as ash. Agatha strolled through the churchyard, while Roy took shelter under a yew, complaining about the ruin of his hair. She trailed her fingers along the tilted stones. The Creswell plot was easy to find, a collection of ornate markers, each ending abruptly, ages cut short, causes discreetly omitted. 5 dead before 40, she murmured, either bad genes or bad company. A crow croaked overhead. Agatha, who distrusted omens, ignored it. She noticed a fresh mound at the edge of the family row, unmarked still, waiting for Lucinda. Roy appeared at her side. "Morbid, darling. Can we go now? I'm starting to feel ancestral guilt." "You don't have ancestors," she said. "You have publicists." Still, she turned away, suddenly aware of how the damp air pressed against her lungs. The Cotswolds could look cosy from a postcard, but today they resembled a polite graveyard. Later that afternoon, Agatha persuaded Mrs. Trent to let them freshen up in the hall's vicinity, by which she meant snoop. The police tape fluttered lazily, unattended while the officers lunched in Mercester. "Just a quick look," said Agatha. "Darling," whispered Roy, "this is trespassing." "Don't be ridiculous, it's civic engagement." They slipped inside through the servants' door. Dust hung thick in the dim corridors, disturbed only by their cautious steps. The house smelled of lilies and secrets. Agatha found herself drawn toward the bridal suite. The bed was still half-made, an absurd mix of luxury and disorder. On the dressing table lay a small wooden box carved with initials, L.C. She opened it carefully. Inside were letters, written in looping feminine script but unsigned. Love letters, ardent, sometimes desperate, never revealing the sender. "Look at this," she murmured. Roy peered over her shoulder. "Oh, delicious. I can't bear to see you with her again. That's proper melodrama." "It's also motive," said Agatha. She pocketed one letter for later reading. In the adjoining bathroom she spotted another oddity, a bottle of dark hair dye, half-used, tucked behind a towel. "Now why," said Agatha slowly, "would a fair-haired bride need this?" "Fashion statement," offered Roy. "Or identity crisis." A sound echoed from the corridor, the heavy creak of floorboards. Agatha froze. Footsteps slow and deliberate, then silence. "We're leaving," whispered Roy. "Not yet," said Agatha, already at the door. But when she peered out, the hall was empty. Only the faint sway of the chandelier suggested movement. "Pipes," said Roy faintly. That excuse again. They retreated before courage failed them entirely. Evening brought little comfort. Mrs. Trent served overcooked stew and local rumours with equal solemnity. "Cursed, that family," she said, ladling gloom onto their plates. "One bride drowned on her honeymoon, another disappeared before the wedding breakfast. My mother warned me never to wear white lace near Odley Cruesis." "How sensible of her," said Agatha. "Black's so slimming." Mrs. Trent didn't smile. "And now poor Lucinda joins them. The curse takes brides, you know. Only brides." Roy shuddered. "Then Agatha's safe." "Cheek," said Agatha. After dinner, they retired to their creaking room. Agatha opened her purloined letter under the dim light. "My dearest, if only you could tell her the truth. She believes you pure, but love built on deceit cannot last." The rest blurred where a tear or a spill had smudged the ink. Someone loved her enough to threaten exposure, Agatha mused, or loved someone else enough to stop her wedding. Roy was already under the covers. "Wake me when the séance starts." "If we're lucky," she muttered. She sat for a while, listening to the wind moan through the chimney. Somewhere a door banged or a ghost agreed. She felt oddly exhilarated, alive again in the way only proximity to death could make her. She was about to switch off the lamp when a soft scrape sounded against the floorboards. Paper slid under the door. Agatha froze. For a moment she thought it a draft. Then she saw it, a folded note pale against the rug. She picked it up, heart thudding. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged as panic. "Leave Odley Cruesis before the next bride falls." "Roy," she whispered. He snored gently. Agatha sat back, note trembling in her fingers. Her first thought was excitement, her second irritation that whoever sent it hadn't thought to include a clue. "Typical," she muttered, threats with no follow-through. Still, she placed the note carefully beside the letters, lit a final cigarette, and watched smoke curl into the stale air. The warning lingered, sour as Mrs. Trent's stew. "Before the next bride falls," she repeated softly. She didn't believe in curses, but she did believe in timing, and someone, somewhere, was counting down. A rare shaft of sunlight fell across Castley Green, startling the ducks and making Agatha Raisin suspicious. Sunshine in the Cotswolds usually meant trouble was brewing, usually for her. She had just opened the Morning Post when the familiar purr of an engine drew up outside. Charles Frayth's vintage convertible, polished to within an inch of its aristocratic life, gleamed in the lane. He climbed out wearing his trademark air of lazy entitlement and a tie that looked as if it had tied itself in protest. "You look radiant, Aggie," he said, sauntering in without waiting to be invited. "That's because I'm furious," said Agatha. "Roy's made me a tabloid mascot, Bill's sulking, and the Creswell case is going sour." "What brings you?" "Curiosity," said Charles, "and boredom, both deadly in combination. Thought we might revisit the hall. You accidentally left your handbag there, remember?" Agatha's eyes narrowed. "I did nothing of the sort." "Then we'll pretend you did. You can interrogate the widower while I look decorative." Agatha considered. Curiosity was indeed her ruin. "Fine," she said, "but if the police catch us, you'll be the handbag." Odley Cruesis Hall looked even more exhausted than before. Boards nailed over windows, police tapes sagging like forgotten bunting. The gate creaked open as though sighing at their persistence. Inside, dust hung thick in the air and the scent of lilies lingered, cloying and accusatory. They found Simon Larch, the widower, in the study with a decanter for company. "Visitors," he said, attempting charm and missing by a mile. "We came to collect my handbag," said Agatha briskly. "It's sentimental." "Everything about marriage is," he said bitterly, then poured himself another drink. Charles perched on the edge of the desk. "Rough few days?" "You could say that. I married a fortune and buried it the same week." Agatha sat opposite him, lighting a cigarette despite his disapproving glance. "You sound very certain the fortune's gone." Her solicitor confirmed it. "The estate's frozen till probate, and the debts, good God, the debts," he gestured vaguely. "I married her for security and she left me insolvency." Agatha blew a thin line of smoke. "Love's overrated anyway." "You'd know," murmured Charles. She ignored him. "Tell me, Mr. Larch, did Lucinda have any enemies?" "She collected them the way some women collect shoes, but the real danger was closer to home." "Meaning?" "Her sister." He looked at Agatha with bleary gravity. "You'll find no mention of her now. She changed her name years ago, but they hated each other. Twins always do. One good, one wicked." Agatha felt the first proper spark of interest since breakfast. "Twins, you say?" He nodded, then slumped forward, snoring softly before she could press further. Charles rose, amused. "Well done, Aggie. You've bored him unconscious." "He's drunk, not bored." She stubbed out her cigarette. "Search the room." "Technically trespassing. Technically detecting." In a drawer of the dressing table adjoining the study, Agatha found a small cut-glass bottle. Its label read Odley No. 5 in elegant script. She uncorked it, sniffed, and recoiled. That's the same perfume the bride carried in her bouquet, sickly sweet with a hint of almonds. "Poisoned by Chanel," said Charles. "Don't be facetious." She slipped the bottle into her bag. "This could be our link between Lucinda and her murder weapon." "Bill will love that. Unlawfully obtained evidence smelling of vanity." "Then he shouldn't leave gaps in the investigation for amateurs to fill," said Agatha. As they were leaving, a constable intercepted them. "Miss Raisin, Sir Charles, the inspector asked me to inform you There's been an arrest." "Already?" said Agatha. "Yes, ma'am. Miss Claire Vernon, the groom's former fiancée. Arsenic traces found in her flat. She's being questioned now." Agatha and Charles exchanged a look. Outside, Charles whistled. "So, the jealous ex. That's neat." "Too neat," said Agatha. "Real killers rarely fit the headline." "Perhaps you're jealous of the police getting there first. Jealous of competence? Hardly." Still, the news unsettled her. It felt premature, convenient, a resolution designed for the front page. That evening, Agatha returned to Castley in a foul mood. Hodge greeted her by ignoring her completely, which somehow made it worse. She poured herself a gin, dialed Bill Wong, and demanded the latest. "Yes, they've charged Claire Vernon," he said. "She had motive, access, and arsenic under her sink." "Half the Cotswolds have arsenic under their sinks," snapped Agatha. "She's being framed." "On what evidence?" "On my instincts." "Your instincts once accused the vicar's wife of drug smuggling." "And she did have suspicious biscuits." Bill's chuckle softened his words. "Try not to interfere. The chief superintendent's already threatening ulcers." "Tell him to try yoga," said Agatha, and hung up. The next day, she dragged Charles back to the hall under the pretext of finding loose ends. "You're relentless," he said, manoeuvring the convertible around a tractor. "Persistence separates the curious from the competent, and the living from the arrested." Inside, the housekeeper, Mrs. Gorse, let them in with minimal enthusiasm. "You again. Haven't you poked enough about?" "Just looking for my handbag," said Agatha smoothly. "Still?" "It's very emotional." Mrs. Gorse sniffed and disappeared. They climbed the grand staircase to the portrait gallery. Dust motes danced in the filtered light. At the far end hung an enormous painting, an elegant young woman in a wedding gown, pale-haired, serene, unmistakably Lucinda Creswell. Except it wasn't. Agatha moved closer. "Look at the inscription. Lady Lucinda Creswell, married 1968. That's 30 years ago, but she's identical." Charles studied it. Remarkable resemblance. Could be her mother. "Could be her twin," said Agatha softly. "He did say twins." "You're building castles on dust." "Dust often hides bones," she said. Their search was interrupted by the faint slam of a door downstairs. Voices followed. Bill's calm tone, the brusque authority of police boots. "Caught," murmured Charles. "Shall we confess or flee?" Agatha straightened her hat. "Neither. We'll brazen." Bill appeared at the top of the stairs, looking resigned. "I might have known." "We were returning a perfume bottle," said Agatha. "You were stealing it, more like. Honestly, Agatha, one day you'll break into the mortuary and demand autographs." "Don't tempt me." Bill rubbed his temple. "For what it's worth, Claire Vernon's out. The arsenic came from old wallpaper cleaner. False alarm." Agatha's eyes flashed triumph. "I told you so." "Yes, yes. But do try not to make my life harder. If you must meddle, at least keep it within village limits." "That's impossible. Murder travels." Later, at the Red Lion, the regulars buzzed with the news. Roy had returned from London to bask in second-hand notoriety. "Darling, your picture's in the Courier," he cried, waving the paper. "Local sleuth outpaces police. Fabulous headline, though the photo's unforgiving." "They always are," said Agatha. "The camera hates reality." Charles clinked her glass. "You're a celebrity again, Aggie. Enjoy it while it lasts." "It never does," she said, though the glow of attention warmed her all the same. Roy fluttered his lashes. "So who done it, then? The twin, the ex, or the butter brigade?" Agatha smiled thinly. "Ask me after my next gin." Night settled softly over Castley. Back home, Hodge sprawled across her chair, claiming it entirely. Agatha eased him aside, lit a cigarette, and stared at the curling smoke. She thought of the portrait, the same serene face twice over, one blonde, one dark. A mirror or a masquerade? She felt the old thrill of pursuit quicken in her veins. The police had their facts. She had her suspicions, which were infinitely more dangerous. Hodge yawned, unimpressed. "All right," she said to him. "I'll keep out of it, for now." He blinked, the feline equivalent of disbelief. "Fine," said Agatha, exhaling. "But if the next corpse turns up wearing perfume, don't say I didn't warn you." She stubbed out her cigarette, poured the last of her gin, and smiled to herself, half defiance, half dread of being right. A cold drizzle had returned to Castley, wrapping the village in a thin, sulking mist. Agatha Raisin stood by her cottage window, glaring at the rain as if it were personal. Hodge, curled on the armchair, opened one eye and shut it again with feline judgment. Agatha lit a cigarette and muttered, "It's always the same. Sunshine for funerals, rain for clues." The telephone trilled. Bill Wong's voice sounded resigned before she even spoke. "All right, Agatha. What have you dragged me into this time?" "History, Bill," said Agatha briskly. "I need access to the parish archives at Odley Cruesis. Old marriage records, deaths, that sort of thing." "You mean breaking and entering?" "Research. I'm bringing credentials, a notebook and a moral conscience." "Bring Roy instead," said Bill. "He deserves punishment." "He's coming," said Agatha. "And so are you." The parish church at Odley Cruesis looked mournful even on a good day. On a wet morning it resembled a stone apology. Inside, the air smelt of hymn books and damp wool. Mrs. Tewkesbury, the vicar's wife, fluttered about like a nervous dove, ushering them into the vestry. "You're sure it's all right to look?" Agatha asked. "Perfectly," said Mrs. Tewkesbury, though she wrung her hands, "but it's frightfully dusty. No one's been down there since the flower rota collapsed in the 80s. "Roy will cope," said Agatha. Roy, immaculately dressed in pale linen, looked appalled. "Darling, I was promised atmosphere, not tetanus." Bill handed him a torch. "Mind the steps. And the rats." Roy blanched. "Rats?" "Historical ones," said Agatha. "Probably all dead." They descended into the crypt-like archive, where stacks of ledgers leaned drunkenly against one another. Agatha coughed, waving away cobwebs. "Good heavens, Bill, these records go back centuries. Look, burials, banns, and, marriages." "You're after Lucinda Creswell's family," said Bill, squinting at a mildewed spine. "Here, 1870 onwards." Agatha flipped pages with impatient fingers. Creswell, here we are. 1968. Lucinda Creswell married Henry Blackmore, drowned same night. Body recovered. And, she frowned, twin sister Harriet Creswell reported missing. "So there really were two Lucindas," said Bill quietly. "Two halves of one problem," said Agatha. "The modern bride was an imposter. She must have assumed her dead sister's name to inherit." Roy, perched on a stool, shuddered as something scuttled across the floor. "Something just touched my foot." "Probably divine retribution," said Agatha. "It had fur." Bill shone the torch. "A rat, Roy. It prefers you to the archives." "Why wouldn't it?" Roy moaned. "Everyone else does." Agatha smothered a laugh. "Calm down. It's only a small one. It was the size of a Shetland pony." "Then it's seen your trousers and surrendered," said Agatha. The humour steadied her, though inwardly her mind raced. If the bride had stolen her twin's identity, it explained the changed hair colour and falsified documents. But why keep the secret for 30 years? And who knew it now? Upstairs, Mrs. Tewkesbury offered tea in the vicarage kitchen. The room was a clutter of good intentions, teacups without saucers, charity leaflets, and a whiff of overboiled cabbage. "Such a tragedy," she murmured. "The Creswells were cursed, people said. But I never believed in curses, only human weakness." "Wisely put," said Agatha, pocketing a biscuit. "Do you recall anything about that first Lucinda? The one who drowned?" Mrs. Tewkesbury thought for a moment. "Only that she was lovely and vain. The whole village turned out for that wedding. She fell into the river after the reception, they said. Terrible shock. The sister, Harriet, disappeared soon after. Rumour said she ran off to London." "Or reinvented herself," said Agatha. "There were whispers," said Mrs. Tewkesbury. "But no proof. Though," she hesitated, "my husband once mentioned a confession letter, found in the old organ loft years ago. It was written by one of the Creswells. He meant to give it to the diocesan office, but misplaced it. I suspect it's still tucked somewhere inside the organ." Agatha's pulse quickened. "What sort of confession?" "I couldn't say. He never read it properly. But if it's there, it might explain everything." Agatha rose, her mind already halfway to the church. "Then let's go find it." "Now?" said Mrs. Tewkesbury, startled. "The choir's practising." "Perfect cover," said Agatha. "We'll blend in." "Darling," said Roy, "you can't blend anywhere. You radiate suspicion." "And talent," said Agatha. The church interior echoed with hesitant scales as the organ wheezed through a hymn. Agatha marched up the aisle with the purpose of Joan of Arc. Bill followed, muttering apologies to the startled choirmaster. She crouched by the side of the massive instrument, examining the lower panels. Dust rose like incense. "Help me with this, Bill." "You'll get us barred from every church in Gloucestershire," he said, but obeyed. Together they prized loose a small wooden panel, revealing a hollow packed with forgotten papers and spiderwebs. Agatha reached in and drew out an envelope, yellowed and sealed with wax. "Got it," she whispered triumphantly. "You can't just—" Bill began, but she was already slipping it into her handbag. "Evidence," she said. "Sacred or not, it's coming with me." They left to the faint accompaniment of All Things Bright and Beautiful, which felt slightly ironic. Back at the B&B, Roy announced he was traumatized and demanded cocoa. Mrs. Trent, the proprietor, produced some that tasted faintly of despair. Agatha ignored him and laid the envelope on the table. "This could be the missing link," she said, "but it's sealed." "Open it then," said Bill. "What if it's private?" "You've read other people's love letters, tax returns, and shopping lists," he reminded her. "Yes, but that was research." She hesitated only a moment longer before sliding a knife beneath the seal. The wax cracked like old bones. Inside lay a single folded sheet. The handwriting was looping and uncertain. She read aloud, "I cannot live with what I've done. She was my sister, and I loved him. The river will wash it away." Agatha stared at the words. So the first Lucinda didn't drown by accident. Harriet killed her, and then took her place. Bill exhaled slowly. If that's true, then the bride who died last week was living under a stolen name for 30 years. "And someone found out," said Agatha. "We'll need to hand that to the police." "Not yet," said Agatha. "I want to know who knew, and why they killed her now." Roy eyed the letter with distaste. "Ghastly handwriting, almost as bad as your moral compass." "My moral compass," said Agatha, "points straight to the truth." "And straight through the nearest pub," murmured Bill. The next morning dawned clearer, as if the rain had finally tired of itself. Agatha felt smugly triumphant as she walked to the church to return the panel before anyone noticed. Inside, the organ stood silent in the slanting light. She knelt, pushing the wood back into place, then froze. The hollow didn't look as she and Bill had left it. Fresh scratch marks scored the wood, and the panel had been shifted. "Someone's been rifling around in here," she muttered. She searched the floor, the pews, the hymn book stand. Nothing. Only a faint whiff of polish and old secrets. Mrs. Tewkesbury appeared behind her, clutching a feather duster. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, you startled me." "Someone's been here," said Agatha. "Well, yes, the cleaner came early." "When?" "Just after dawn. She said she wanted to air the church." Agatha straightened. "Did she say anything about an envelope?" "She didn't say anything at all, only that she'd found something best kept in God's hands." Agatha's mouth tightened. "God seems to have a suspicious number of assistants in this village." Bill arrived moments later, summoned by her furious call. "Slow down," he said. "What's missing?" "Whoever was here was looking for the confession letter," she said, "and you can't tell me it's coincidence." "We'll check who has keys," said Bill. "Start with the cleaner," said Agatha. "Pious types always have something to hide." "Aggie," said Bill gently, "so do you." She glared. "Mine's only curiosity." That evening they met at the Red Lion, where gossip flowed more freely than beer. Roy was recounting his encounter with the rat of Satan for the 5th time. Charles listened, amused, while Agatha stabbed moodily at a shepherd's pie. "So, the letters vanished," Charles said. "Very convenient for everyone except you." "Someone wanted it silenced," said Agatha. "It's proof of identity fraud and murder. It would destroy the Creswell name." "Perhaps the church mice ate it," said Roy. "If they did, they've a better diet than you." Bill arrived, coat damp, face grave. "We've checked the keys. Only 3 people have them. The vicar, his wife, and the cleaner. The cleaner swears she found nothing." "Then she's lying," said Agatha. "Or telling the truth and someone else took it later," said Bill. "I'll dig further." Agatha sat back, frustrated but oddly exhilarated. The past was rising like a ghost, whispering of guilt and inheritance. The trick would be catching whoever had woken it. "You'll keep out of it, won't you?" said Bill. "Of course," said Agatha, smiling sweetly. He looked unconvinced. Back home that night, Carsley was quiet under a thin drizzle. Hodge padded to meet her, stretching with the weary dignity of one who tolerates human folly. Agatha poured a gin, stared at the dark garden and lit a cigarette. She thought of the stolen confession, of the drowned bride, of the twin who'd lived a lie for 30 years. Somewhere in all that deceit was a simple motive: greed, fear, or love. Probably all three. Hodge leapt onto her lap and began to purr, unconcerned by mystery or morality. "You're lucky," she told him. "You don't care who anyone used to be." He blinked lazily, unimpressed by philosophy. "Fine," said Agatha, smiling faintly. "But if someone breaks in tonight, you're guarding the gin." Outside, the church bell tolled the hour, solemn and unhelpful. Agatha sipped, smoked, and waited for the past to surface again. Carsley was abuzz before breakfast. The news had travelled faster than the post van. Edward Larch's fiancée, Sophie Lane, the one with the glossy hair and the smug London accent, had inherited his bakery. By 9 o'clock, the WI phone tree was ablaze, and by 10, the Red Lion was serving its first sympathy gin. Agatha Raisin, who loathed being the last to know anything, sat at her kitchen table glowering at the Evesham Courier. The headline read, "Tragic Baker's Legacy Falls to Bride-to-Be." She lit a cigarette and muttered, "Bride-to-be, my foot. She's a bride of buttercream and deceit." Hodge sprawled across the newspaper, flicked his tail with indifferent elegance. The telephone rang. Mrs. Bloxby's gentle voice emerged, full of tactful concern. "Agatha, dear, I thought you might have heard. The will readings today. Sophie Lane will be there, of course. Poor thing." "Poor thing, my eye," said Agatha. "If she's innocent, I'll eat a scone without jam. I'm going." "Do behave," murmured Mrs. Bloxby. "Solicitors dislike drama." "Then they should avoid wills," said Agatha, and rang off. The drizzle had settled in again by the time she reached Mercester. The solicitor's office stood on the high street, a narrow brick building whose brass plaque gleamed with self-importance. Inside, it smelled of paper, polish, and quiet avarice. Charles Frayth arrived just behind her, hands in pockets, tie slightly crooked. "Couldn't resist," he said cheerfully. "I adore legal theatre. All the tears without the conviction." "Mind your manners," said Agatha. "I'm here on business." "Naturally," said Charles. "You're incapable of leisure." They were shown into a wood-panelled room where Sophie Lane already waited, pale in a designer suit that screamed London money. She clutched a handkerchief as though auditioning for tragedy. Bill Wong nodded politely from the corner, notebook ready. "Official presence," he said quietly to Agatha, in case emotions turn litigious. "They always do," Agatha murmured. The solicitor, Mr. Hemsley, adjusted his spectacles. "We are gathered to hear the last testament of Edward Larch. I will read the pertinent clauses." The room hushed. Rain ticked against the windows like impatient fingers. "To my fiancée, Miss Sophie Lane," droned Hemsley, "I bequeath full ownership of Le Pain Divine Bakery, all stock and profits thereof." A rustle of gasps followed. Sophie raised a trembling hand to her mouth. Agatha watched her closely. The tremor was perfect. Too perfect. She'd seen less controlled emotion at a Cotswold Players' rehearsal. Then came the final line, "To my loyal staff, I leave my gratitude." "That's it?" said Agatha aloud. "No mention of family?" "Mrs. Raisin," warned Bill under his breath, "don't start." But Sophie swayed dramatically, whispering, "Oh, Edward, too generous, too cruel," before collapsing neatly onto the carpet. Charles muttered, "Curtain." Bill and Hemsley rushed forward. Mrs. Bloxby, who had slipped in quietly at the back, knelt beside the swooning girl and murmured, "She's breathing quite evenly, you know." Agatha folded her arms. "Of course she is. No one faints with such tidy posture." Sophie opened one eye just long enough to check who was watching, then fluttered back into unconsciousness. "Publicity stunt," Agatha hissed. "Roy would approve." "He'd charge," said Charles. When Sophie revived, miraculously timed to coincide with the arrival of a reporter, Agatha felt the full pleasure of righteous suspicion. Outside, Bill caught her by the elbow. "Leave it alone, Aggie. The lab's still working on the perfume sample from the bouquet. You're just seeing patterns." "Patterns are evidence wearing a hat," said Agatha, "and I intend to tip it off." Bill sighed. "Try not to interrogate anyone before lunch. No promises." The rain eased as Agatha and Mrs. Bloxby walked toward the Red Lion for a fortifying gin. The village buzzed like a beehive with loose morals. Everyone had an opinion on Sophie Lane. "She's modern, you know," said Doris Simpson, polishing glasses behind the bar. "Writes about food for the papers. Takes photographs of butter. Odd business, but pays. Photography, said Agatha thoughtfully. She said something about props, didn't she? Styling the perfect cake, she called it. She styled Edward into an early grave, muttered Doris. Mrs. Blocksby gave her a mild look. We mustn't be uncharitable. Agatha took a sip of gin. Charity begins at suspicion. Later that afternoon, curiosity dragged her back to the solicitor's office on the pretext of retrieving a misplaced glove. Sophie's handbag still lay on the chair where she had fainted. Agatha glanced round, no one watching. She opened the bag with practiced speed. Inside were tissues, a lipstick, a tube of aspirin, and a crumpled receipt. She smoothed it open. Purchase: cyanide powder, small quantity, labelled for photographic use. Supplier: Chemcraft, Oxford. Her pulse quickened. Photography props, indeed. She slipped the paper into her notebook just as Bill appeared in the doorway. Aggie, what are you doing? Looking for my glove, she said sweetly. In someone else's handbag? It wandered. Bill looked heavenward. You'll get yourself arrested before Sophie does. Then at least you'll visit me, she said, breezing past him. That evening the Castley gossip circle was in full spin. The Red Lion's snug hummed with speculation. Charles occupied his usual corner, lazily charming half the clientele, while Roy Silver, fresh from London with a scarf like a flag of surrender, was soaking up attention. Darling, you won't believe it, he exclaimed. The courier wants an interview with Sophie. I might manage her publicity. You'll manage her downfall if you're not careful, said Agatha. Oh, Aggie, don't be such a provincial. She's glamorous. Imagine, a food blogger in Mercester. It's practically civilization. Blogging, said Agatha darkly, sounds like a disease. Roy patted her hand. That's jealousy talking. It's experience talking, she snapped. Women who perform innocence are never innocent. Charles lifted his glass. Cheers to cynicism. It keeps the blood warm. Warmer than yours, she said. Mrs. Blocksby entered quietly, her expression thoughtful. Agatha, she said, I couldn't help noticing something earlier. When Sophie fainted, her pulse didn't race at all. I rather think she was counting. Counting? Yes. 1, 2, 3. Stage rhythm. She's been rehearsing. Agatha smiled grimly. Then tomorrow she'll get her encore at the police station. The next morning dawned bright and brittle. Agatha met Bill outside Mercester Police HQ. He looked tired. You heard, he said. We've enough evidence to arrest Sophie Lane. Evidence meaning my evidence, said Agatha. Don't start claiming credit. That receipt's circumstantial. She says it was for an art project. Art my foot. She poisoned the man who fed her croissants. Aggie, jealousy isn't proof. Jealous? Of her? Don't be absurd. He gave her a look that said he wasn't entirely convinced. They walked together to the bakery. A police car idled nearby. Through the window, Sophie was serving coffee to a small queue of reporters smiling tragically. The air smelled of sugar and deceit. Bill touched Agatha's arm. You can't go in there. Watch me. She pushed open the door. Bells jingled. Sophie looked up, startled but composed. Mrs. Raisin, she said softly. Come for a pastry. Or a quote. Neither, said Agatha. I came to warn you. The police are about to arrest you for murder. A hush fell over the customers. Sophie's hand trembled just enough to rattle the coffee cup. Then she smiled. I've done nothing wrong. I adored Edward. So much you bought cyanide for him? For photographs. It gives cakes that antique tint. Everyone knows that. Only killers and stylists, said Agatha. Bill appeared in the doorway. That's enough, Aggie. He nodded to the uniformed officer behind him. Miss Lane, please come with us. Sophie paled, turned and fainted again, with precisely the same delicate swoop. Rehearsed, murmured Mrs. Blocksby, who had quietly followed them in. Encore, said Charles. Agatha watched as they led Sophie out, the crowd parting like whipped cream. For a moment she felt almost sorry for her. Almost. Outside, Bill said wearily, We'll charge her if the lab confirms cyanide. Should have results by morning. And if it doesn't, said Agatha, then she walks free. Agatha looked toward the bakery window where the cakes gleamed, innocent and fattening. She's guilty, she said softly. No woman that slim lives honestly around butter. That night, Castley exhaled its gossip into quiet. Agatha sat by the fire, Hodge curled like smoke beside her. The flames flickered against the glass, Rain returned, tapping gently on the panes. She poured a gin and watched the bubbles rise. She should have felt triumphant, another victory of intuition over bureaucracy. Instead, she felt tired. Sophie's tears, however artificial, had reminded her of her own foolish hopes, of romance, of admiration, of being seen. Vanity came in many disguises. Hodge stretched, unimpressed by moral insight. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "I may be vain, but at least I earn it." He yawned. "Fine," she added. "I'll make it up to you with sardines tomorrow, if Sophie's not using them for her next art project." She lit another cigarette, exhaled a long ribbon of smoke, and smiled faintly into the quiet. "Jealous, am I?" she murmured. "Perhaps, but at least I don't faint for effect." The clock ticked, the rain softened, and Carsley slept on, content in its gossip, waiting for morning and the next scandal. The morning broke damp and indecisive, as though the Cotswolds couldn't quite commit to weather or morality. Mist hung over Carsley's hedgerows, softening everything except Agatha Raisin's mood. She sat in her cottage, glaring at the phone as though it had insulted her. Bill Wong had promised to ring with news about Sophie Lane's arrest, but so far there'd been nothing but silence, and Hodge's judgmental stare from the windowsill. "You're lucky," Agatha told him, lighting a cigarette. "You don't have to wait for men to tell you anything." The cat blinked, unimpressed. The newspaper headline caught her eye again. "Widower vanishes after inheritance scandal." She stubbed out her cigarette, grabbed her handbag, and said aloud, "Not vanishes, hides, and I'm going to find out where." Mercester Station was half empty and entirely dreary, the sort of place where hope went for a smoke. Agatha stood on the platform, coat buttoned against the drizzle, scanning faces until she saw him. Simon Larch, former groom, current scandal. He was slumped on a bench near the kiosk, surrounded by luggage and self-pity. She strode over, heels clicking like punctuation marks. "Running away, are we?" she said briskly. He started. "Mrs. Raisin, no, just travelling. Fresh air." "On a train?" "Change of scene, then." "You'll need more than that," said Agatha. "Come along, I'll buy you a drink." He hesitated. "It's barely noon." "Exactly, no crowds." 10 minutes later, they were in the railway pub, the sort of establishment that had given up on ambition around 1974. Agatha ordered 2 gins, which the barman served without enthusiasm. "You look dreadful," she told Larch, sliding him a glass. "Guilt doesn't suit you." He winced. "You think I killed her?" "I think you knew who she really was." Silence stretched between them. Outside, a train shrieked through the mist. Finally he said, "You don't miss much, do you?" "I've missed a great many things," said Agatha dryly, "including decent men, but go on." He took a gulp of gin and grimaced. "Yes, I knew. I found out 3 weeks before the wedding. Old newspaper clipping. Her real sister's death, her disappearance. She told me she'd reinvented herself for a new life, said the past was best forgotten." "And you believed her?" "I pretended to, but I also knew there was money involved. The Creswell estate. I thought—" He rubbed his temples. "I thought I could use it. Marry her, then persuade her to share the inheritance, or else." "Blackmail as a marriage vow," said Agatha. "How touching. It wasn't meant to be cruel. Well, she had everything. I had debts. She made me feel like a charity case." Agatha studied him. He wasn't handsome enough for tragedy, but he wore remorse with reasonable flair. "So, you planned to squeeze her after the honeymoon. Then she dies conveniently before you can collect. Not the best timing." "I didn't kill her," he said fiercely. "I might have been a fool, but I'm not a murderer." "Everyone says that," said Agatha, "except the ones who are too clever to be caught." He slumped back. "You don't understand. She was terrified that week. Said someone knew her secret, someone else besides me. She even thought the vicar's wife was watching her." Agatha frowned. "Mrs. Tewkesbury. She couldn't terrify a cucumber sandwich." "Maybe, but Lucinda, Harriet, whatever her name was, she was paranoid. Every letter, every phone call, she hid. Then she insisted on dyeing her hair before the wedding. Said it was for fashion, but she was covering her real self." "Covering," repeated Agatha softly. "Not creating. There's a difference." He looked at her helplessly. "I swear, Mrs. Raisin, I didn't poison her. When she collapsed, I thought, God forgive me, I thought she was faking. She did that sometimes. Drama soothed her nerves." Agatha sipped her gin, watching him squirm. She believed him, annoyingly. His type lied for convenience, not murder, and his self-pity had the ring of genuine mediocrity. "So you'll just vanish now," she said. "Hide from gossip?" "There's nothing left for me here." "Nonsense, there's always the pub," she said, finishing his gin for him. He gave a hollow laugh. "You're not as kind as people say." "No one says that," said Agatha, "but I'm rarely wrong." She left him nursing his regrets and returned to her car, the mist closing behind her like theatre curtains. As she drove toward Carsley, her mind replayed his words. Someone else knew her secret. By the time she reached the village, she was halfway through her second cigarette and had promoted 3 people to prime suspect status. Mrs. Bloxby answered the door at the vicarage with her usual calm smile. "Agatha, dear, you look windblown." "I've been interrogating widowers. Improves the circulation." They sat in the vicarage kitchen, all warmth and clutter. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea while Agatha lit another cigarette in defiance of domestic holiness. "I don't think Simon Larch did it," she said. "Too limp. He admitted knowing about her false identity, yes, but someone else was threatening her too." Mrs. Bloxby stirred her tea thoughtfully. Perhaps the truth frightened her as much as exposure. Some lies become home. "That's poetic, but not helpful." "Poetry often isn't," said Mrs. Bloxby mildly. Agatha sighed. She dyed her hair before the wedding. Why do that if she'd been pretending for years? "Perhaps the past was catching up," said Mrs. Bloxby, "or she wanted to be recognized by someone who knew her before." Agatha stared. That's it. The hair dye wasn't disguise, it was a message. She was signaling to someone. "Then you must find out who saw it." "Preferably before Bill arrests the wrong person again," muttered Agatha. By evening she was at the Red Lion, her second office. The fire crackled, gossip simmered. Roy Silver perched beside her, all scarf and scandal. "Darling, you've missed the latest," he said. "The paper's calling her the double bride. I suggested twin of sin, but they said it was libelous." "You're a menace," said Agatha. "Drink your wine quietly." Charles arrived moments later, looking irritatingly relaxed. "You've been busy, Aggie. The station master says you frightened the widower into therapy." "At least he's doing something useful for once." "Bill says you extracted a confession." "Partial. He knew she wasn't who she claimed. Planned to blackmail her. Pathetic, really." Charles smiled. "Takes one to know one." "If I wanted charm," she said, "I'd talk to the gin bottle." "You do," he said. She ignored him. Someone else wanted that secret buried. Someone clever enough to use poison, not panic. Roy clapped a hand dramatically to his chest. "You mean one of us?" "You're too loud for murder," said Agatha. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold air, and Bill Wong. He spotted them, sighed, and came over. "You might as well hear it from me," he said. "The lab results came in." Agatha leaned forward. "Go on." "DNA proves the bride's hair was naturally dark. She'd dyed it blonde before the wedding." "So Simon was right," said Agatha. "She changed it at the end. Any idea why?" "That's what I intend to find out." Roy fluttered. "Maybe she wanted to look angelic for the photographs." "Or to match the poison," said Agatha grimly. "Cyanide's pale too." Bill frowned. "Aggie, for once, stay out of it. We're tracing the hair dye supplier." "Do that," she said. "But if you arrest Sophie Lane, you'll regret it. She's too shallow for homicide." "Then who?" "Someone who cared about appearances," said Agatha, standing, "and knew exactly how to erase a past, one colour at a time." She left them staring after her, swept out into the night like a small storm in high heels. Back home, the cottage was dark except for Hodge's expectant silhouette on the windowsill. Agatha fed him mechanically, then poured herself a generous gin. The day had left her restless, a blend of triumph and emptiness she knew too well. She sat by the fire, turning Larch's confession over in her mind. He adored her, he'd said once, until he envied her. Admiration curdled easily. Perhaps she knew something of that herself. Hodge jumped onto her lap, a soft weight against her loneliness. She stroked his fur absently. "You know," she told him, "it's a wretched thing, needing to be admired. First they flatter you, then they disappear." Hodge purred. "You're right," she said. "At least you only demand dinner." The phone rang, sharp and officious. She snatched it up. If that's a reporter, I'll— Aggie, said Bill's voice, urgent. Listen, the DNA test confirmed something else. The bride's hair was naturally dark, very dark. She'd been blonde only for the last few weeks. Someone helped her with the dye, someone close. Agatha froze. You mean— Exactly. She was trying to hide, not flaunt herself. And whoever knew her real colour knew her secret. Then the murderer isn't done yet, said Agatha quietly. Be careful, Aggie. She hung up and stared into the fire. Flames licked upward, bright and deceptive. Outside, the drizzle thickened, blurring the world into shades of grey. Hodge, she said, reaching for her cigarette packet, if I ever decide to remarry, stop me. He meowed once, which she chose to take as agreement. Agatha struck a match, lit her cigarette, and smiled crookedly through the smoke. Men, cats or corpses, she said, at least one of them always turns up. The clock ticked steadily on. Rain tapped at the window. Somewhere in the dark, another secret waited to be uncovered. The drizzle had returned, soft and persistent, as if the Cotswolds were being washed for yet another scandal. Carsley looked freshly laundered and faintly guilty. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen window, cigarette in hand, watching the grey morning steam rise from the hedgerows. It's always the same, she told Hodge, rain before a revelation, and usually after. Hodge flicked his tail and resumed ignoring her. Agatha had no patience for feline superiority, so she stubbed out the cigarette and reached for her coat. She had spent half the night reconstructing the wedding rehearsal in her mind, each detail clicking into place like stubborn puzzle pieces. Now the pattern was clear and deliciously outrageous. She rang Bill Wong before reason could intervene. Bill, it's Agatha. I've solved it. A groan crackled down the line. You say that every week. And I'm right every month. Listen, the woman who called herself Lucinda Creswell wasn't murdered by her groom or that ghastly blogger. She was killed by her sister, her real twin, posing as the jilted fiancé. That's a new theory. It's not a theory, it's deduction. Get to the WI Hall this afternoon. We'll need an audience. An audience? Naturally. Truth must be entertaining or it doesn't stick. Bill sighed. If this goes wrong, you're explaining it to the superintendent. If it goes wrong, I'll be dead, so I shan't mind. By noon, the WI Hall smelled of sponge cake, raincoats and ambition. The annual charity sale was in full swing. Jam jars glittered, cardigans sagged, and the raffle prizes looked faintly ashamed of themselves. Agatha, in her best navy jacket and sharpest mood, moved through the crowd like a general inspecting troops. You look purposeful, murmured Charles Fraith, appearing at her elbow with his usual air of idle amusement. Plotting another coup for local gossip? Justice, she said crisply. With refreshments. Splendid combination. Shall I hold the gin? Hold your tongue. The murderer's here. Charles's smile widened. Naturally. Where else would she shop? Agatha ignored him. Across the hall, a woman in an elegant cream coat was arranging jars of lemon curd with theatrical care. Her face was a perfect mirror of the dead bride's, only older, harder, alive. The ex-fiancée, Miss Claire Vernon, had sensibly stayed away from village life. In her place stood Lucinda's sister, Miss Harriet Creswell, lately released after police questioning, arranging jars of lemon curd with theatrical care, and, if gossip served, her sister's estate. Mrs. Bloxby joined Agatha near the teapot stall, serene as ever. I do hope you're not planning anything too dramatic, Agatha. The raffle begins at 3. It'll be memorable, said Agatha. Possibly historic. At 2:30, with the crowd thick around the cake tables, Agatha mounted the small stage. Bill Wong stood discreetly at the back with 2 uniformed constables pretending to admire doilies. Charles lounged in the front row, purely for mischief. Ladies and gentlemen, began Agatha, tapping the microphone that wasn't connected. Before we draw the raffle, a small matter of village interest. You may have read about the tragedy at Odley Cruesis Hall. A bride dead, a family disgraced. But what you haven't heard, until now, is the truth. Because truth, like jam, always rises to the top. A ripple of gossip-thrilled laughter moved through the hall. Harriet Creswell turned sharply. Mrs. Raisin, this is hardly the place. On the contrary, said Agatha, it's precisely the place. You see, the story everyone believes is that Lucinda Creswell, poor delicate creature, was poisoned by jealousy and money, but the real story is older and nastier. She paused, savouring the hush. 30 years ago there were two Creswell sisters, Lucinda and Harriet. Lucinda vanished after a scandal involving debts and a hasty engagement. Harriet stayed behind, the respectable twin, inheriting the hall and its reputation. But when bankruptcy loomed, she persuaded Lucinda to swap lives. Lucinda took the name Harriet and disappeared into quiet country comfort. And you, she pointed directly at the woman by the lemon curd, you became Lucinda Creswell, the mysterious fiancée with the tragic past. Gasps fluttered like bunting. Mrs. Blocksby looked mildly distressed, which Agatha considered a sign of success. "How dare you?" said Harriet, voice trembling. "My sister is dead. You should be ashamed." "Yes," said Agatha, descending the steps. "She is dead, because you killed her." The room seemed to tilt. Rain ticked against the windows. Charles sat up, finally interested. Agatha stopped 3 feet from Harriet. "You let her live your life for years. She paid your debts, restored the hall, made you respectable. But when you returned and found her marrying into money, your money, you couldn't bear it. You attended the rehearsal as the spurned sister, bearing a bouquet for forgiveness. Only the perfume wasn't French. It was homemade, laced with cyanide, a single spray, and your twin collapsed before the vows." "Nonsense," cried Harriet. "You've no proof." "Haven't I?" Agatha produced a small bottle from her handbag. Odley No. 5. "We found it in your luggage, and Bill's laboratory friends matched the scent on the bouquet to this exact formula. Your French supplier was a bottle of household cleaner and almond oil." Bill stepped forward. "Miss Creswell, I'm afraid you'll have to come with us." For a moment Harriet looked almost relieved, as though confession were a kind of vanity she could finally indulge. Then she laughed, a brittle sound. "You don't understand. It was my name, my house, my life. She stole it all. I only took it back." "With poison," said Agatha. "With justice," said Harriet, and allowed the constables to lead her away. The hall erupted like a shaken teapot. Everyone talked at once, some outraged, others exhilarated. Doris Simpson declared she'd always suspected something continental about that perfume. Roy Silver materialized from nowhere, notebook already out. "Darling, front-page material. I'm calling it The Bride and the Bother." "Call it libel and I'll sue," said Agatha, but without conviction. She was enjoying herself too much. Mrs. Blocksby laid a gentle hand on her arm. "You were very brave, Agatha, though perhaps next time a smaller audience." "Nonsense," said Agatha. "Truth needs witnesses, or at least applause." Charles approached, balancing 2 cups of tea. "Another bride undone by love," he murmured, handing her one, "and another by envy." Agatha sipped, grimaced. "Men cause both." "We try," he said cheerfully. "Try less," she advised. He laughed, and for a brief, foolish moment Agatha felt almost light-hearted. But triumph had a way of curdling quickly. She caught her reflection in the tea-urn, face flushed, hair slightly wild, and thought, "You look like a woman who still expects romance at 53. Idiot." By evening the drizzle had thickened into a steady rain. Carsley's windows glowed like small conspiracies as Agatha trudged home, heels clicking on the wet lane. The village, replete with gossip, would dine on the Creswell scandal for months. She ought to have felt victorious. Instead, she felt oddly bereaved, as though every solved case stole a little mystery from life. Hodge met her at the door with the lofty indifference of one who'd already eaten. She hung up her coat, poured a gin, and sank into the armchair by the fire. "Well," she told him, "another murder solved, another villain in custody, and not a single man grateful. Story of my life." Hodge blinked and began washing his paw. She took that as agreement. The phone rang. It was Bill, sounding weary but fond. "All wrapped up. Harriet's already confessing in Technicolor. You were right, Aggie." "Naturally." "You realize you've now ruined the superintendent's weekend?" "He should thank me. I've given him publicity." "He'll give you indigestion. Don't interfere next time." "That's like asking the rain not to fall," he laughed. "Good night, Agatha. Try to stay out of trouble." "You first," she said, and hung up. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the rain blurred the world into shades of forgiveness. Agatha lit another cigarette and watched the smoke coil upward like thought. For a moment she saw the Creswell sisters in the rising tendrils, Two women chasing admiration and ending in envy. Mirror images, really. She wasn't so different. A lifetime of wanting to be seen, noticed, chosen. And for what? A few headlines and the occasional dinner with Charles, who'd never notice anything that wasn't polished silver or female flattery. She laughed quietly at herself. Pathetic, she told Hodge, but at least self-aware. The cat stretched luxuriously, tail curling toward the fire. Yes, you're right, she went on. I should be grateful. I've got central heating, gin, and a cat who doesn't criticize. What more could a woman want? Still, when the telephone rang again, just once, then stopped, she felt that familiar flutter, absurd and hopeful. It was probably Roy wanting a quote, or Charles offering supper, but for a heartbeat she imagined something else, a voice saying, "Well done, Agatha. You were magnificent." The silence that followed was almost kind. She poured another gin, lifted it toward the window where the rain streaked silver in the lamplight, and said softly, "To the brides of Odley Cruesis, one undone by love, one by envy, and one by sheer nosiness." Then she smiled, a small, private curve of the lips, and added, "And to me, who will never learn." Hodge yawned, unimpressed. Agatha took the hint, turned off the light, and let the darkness settle comfortably around her. Tomorrow would bring new gossip, new rain, and, if fortune were kind, a new mystery. For now, the detective of Carsley was content. Peace, in Carsley, never arrived quietly. It crept in after scandal like an embarrassed guest, pretending it had been there all along. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, the Daily Mail spread before her, pretending to read about world affairs while secretly rereading her own name. The Marple of Mercester solves twin bride mystery. She snorted, half with pride, half with disgust. Marple indeed. I've better legs and fewer cardigans. Hodge, unimpressed by journalistic triumph, sprawled across the newspaper, his tail flicking over Agatha's coffee cup. She nudged him gently. "Move, you furry saboteur. You're covering my review." The cat yawned, which she took as commentary on the press. She reached for a cigarette, paused, then decided one small victory deserved smoke. Outside, drizzle polished the village into damp perfection. Doris Simpson could be heard next door, clattering bins and singing Jerusalem with defiant cheer. Somewhere in the distance, the Red Lion door creaked open for its lunchtime regulars. Order had returned to Carsley, as it always did, half relieved, half disappointed. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Bloxby stood on the step, holding a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. "I've brought muffins," she said gently. "Thought you might fancy something warm." "You're a saint," said Agatha, ushering her in. "The village should erect a statue, preferably in a rainproof niche." Mrs. Bloxby smiled, unbothered by flattery. "I heard about the article. You must be very pleased." "Pleased? It's mortifying. They compared me to a pensioner who knits between corpses." "And yet," said Mrs. Bloxby, eyeing the mantel, "that frame seems rather new." Agatha followed her gaze. The newspaper clipping sat neatly trimmed and framed in silver, as innocent as sin. "Purely for irony," she said quickly. "One must record the absurdities of life." "Of course," said Mrs. Bloxby, pouring tea. "And how are you feeling now that it's all over?" Agatha blew out smoke. "Flat, if you must know. Solving a murder's like winning a raffle. You end up with something you didn't need and no one to share it with." Mrs. Bloxby regarded her kindly. "Perhaps what you enjoy isn't the victory, but the chase." "Oh, don't start sounding like a vicar's sermon. I'm perfectly content." "And yet," said Mrs. Bloxby, "you've cleaned the house twice and rearranged the flowers 3 times. "Observation is a dangerous gift, Mrs. Bloxby." "It's also what makes you remarkable," she replied softly. Agatha flushed, which annoyed her. Compliments always did. She reached for another cigarette instead. "You know, that Creswell woman wasn't the first to reinvent herself for love. We all do it, one way or another. Different lipstick, different lies." "Or different courage," said Mrs. Bloxby. "Sometimes people change to find themselves, not hide." "And sometimes they end up dead at the altar," said Agatha. "I'll stick to hair dye and self-delusion." The vicar's wife smiled, finishing her tea. "Well, if you tire of self-delusion, you could always try honesty. It's much cheaper than perfume." Agatha laughed despite herself. "I'd smell dreadful in sincerity." Mrs. Bloxby stood to go. You're incorrigible. And proud of it, said Agatha. Tell the vicar his next sermon should be about vanity. I'll provide illustrations. After Mrs. Blocksby left, the cottage felt emptier for being tidy. Hodge had disappeared somewhere warm and private, possibly judging humanity from under the bed. Agatha tidied the tea things, then wandered into the sitting room, lighting another cigarette just for the comfort of it. The phone rang, startling her into spilling ash on the carpet. Agatha Raisin Investigations, she said, automatically professional. Darling, came Roy Silver's effervescent squeal. You're a sensation. The tabloids are queuing for your quote. Channel 4's sniffing round for a docudrama. The Brides of Odley Cruesis. Death in White Satin. How's that for branding? Agatha's heart did a small treacherous skip. They want me on television? Well, possibly your voice first. But give it time. We'll need a makeover. More beige, less leopard print. The camera adds 10 years, though in your case that's just honesty. Thank you, Roy, she said tartly. Remind me why I haven't poisoned you yet. Because you love me, darling. Everyone loves me. Even the BBC. They'll love you more when you stop talking. Oh, but think. We'll have you narrating your own cases. Agatha Raisin, Cotswold Sleuth. Ratings gold. She allowed herself a flicker of pride, quickly hidden. I'll consider it. After all, one must manage fame with dignity. Exactly. We'll discuss contracts over lunch in London. No chance. I've had enough drama to last a month. Go bother someone glamorous. But you are glamorous, Roy cried, scandalized. A middle-aged goddess with murder in her eyes. Goodbye, Roy. She hung up, though not before a reluctant smile escaped her lips. The idea of herself on television was ridiculous, and oddly tempting. Fame, like gin, was best in small doses but hard to refuse. Evening fell slowly, with that pearly Cotswold light that made the village look hand-painted. Agatha stood at her window, watching mist settle over the green. The church bell chimed 7. Somewhere a dog barked, insistent and ordinary. On the table a vase of roses drooped theatrically. Their scent had gone faint, sweet and tired, like applause after the curtain. Agatha poured herself a gin and tonic, the glass clinking like punctuation. She sat down, smoke curling through the lamplight. You know, Hodge, she said aloud, though he'd only just emerged from under the sofa, Mrs. Blocksby's right. People reinvent themselves for love. The Creswell twins, Sophie with her fainting spells, even that ridiculous groom. They all pretended to be someone else, and what did it get them? Hodge jumped onto the table, tail flicking dangerously near the gin. Yes, said Agatha. Exactly. Trouble. He sniffed a rose, then turned away, unimpressed. Don't look at me like that, she went on. I've never reinvented myself for love. I've done it for survival, and occasionally for better lighting. She stared at the flowers a moment longer. They were beautiful even in decay, stubbornly refusing to fall apart, a bit like her. The clock ticked with homey authority. Somewhere in the distance a lorry rumbled along the main road to Mercester, carrying on life's business, unbothered by romance or reputation. Agatha sighed, lit another cigarette, and leaned back. The smoke rose in lazy spirals, catching the lamplight like a ghost's afterthought. Bride or spinster, she murmured. It's all performance in the end. Hodge, ever the critic, flicked his tail in calm agreement. You're right, she added. The trick is knowing when the audience is gone home. She smiled faintly, the kind that hides both satisfaction and regret. Outside, rain began again, soft, persistent, reassuringly British. Agatha raised her glass toward the window. To gin, gossip, and ghosts, she said, and to being alive to enjoy all three. Hodge purred, a small domestic benediction. The fire crackled, the village settled into evening calm, and Agatha, warm and weary, let the day end exactly as it should, cigarette glowing, vanity intact, and heart, despite everything, stubbornly hopeful.